So just to review a couple of things we said in the last session before we move on a little bit. We said that when we look out on the world around us, we just receive a mass of sense data. And we have to make sense or meaning out of all of this stuff. So to do that, we draw lines around various collections of data and we create meaningful objects. And then we have to give names to the things we create so we can communicate with others. So again, we need to do this to function. The problem is we don't realize this is what we're doing, that we're creating our world of experience. That it seems that the world is already divided up into many separate, discrete things already. And we saw that believing in such a world leads to attachment to pleasant things, aversion to unpleasant things, and the whole mess starts from there. And so, therefore, we are to investigate these things that appear to be independently existent, to see if they really exist in this way. And what's being said here in the Heart Sutra is that it's very much recommended. We start by investigating me, the person. How do I exist? There seems to be an independent me here. Can we find this independent me anywhere here? And if we can't find this independent me, when we search, then we hold that experience of not finding, because this is an experience of emptiness. But again, often what happens is that because we tend to be stuck in these two extremes of existence and non-existence, and now, of course, we're camped in the extreme of existence, grasping onto things existing independently. When we start to undermine that in meditation by looking for the supposed independent me that seems to be here and not really finding it, then we simply flip to the other extreme, misinterpreting that not finding, meaning there's no me at all. And then often a lot of fear comes from that. And so to help us overcome this fear, we are to, of course, understand that what we are discovering is not that there's no me, but there's no independent findable me. And that does not mean there's no me at all. It means that there's no independent findable me, therefore there is a dependent me. And we saw what does it mean for the me or any phenomena to be dependent is all phenomena exist depending on causes and conditions, they exist depending on their parts, and at the most subtle level, everything that exists depending on labeling, designation, conceptual framework. And we had a look at what that sort of meant in the last session. Now, generally in most of our experiences, and in experience, of course, we're talking single experience. In single experience, usually the first line we draw is we draw a line around here and we create experiencer. And we give it a label, me, subject, experiencer, whatever label. And so then at the same time we're drawing a line here, then we end up drawing the line of experienced. But again, and we have to do that to function, and I think newborn baby has difficulty to even draw that line, to distinguish experiencer from experience. They have to learn how to do that. So that's not a problem. The problem is we don't realize that's what's going on. We, of course, turn the line we draw into a boundary. We contract around the me part of the experience. We grasp on to the me part of the experience as if somehow this me exists independent of the experienced. And so this is called self-grasping, grasping onto the idea that there's an independent me here. And of course then by default we grasp onto independent world, And then we have all those problems we mentioned before, that we end up with attachment to pleasant things, aversion to unpleasant things, and the whole mess starts from there. And generally, in most of our experiences, this self-grasping is very strong. That most of our experiences, we have a strong sense of me going there, me doing this, me saying that. And it's usually with this very strong self-grasping. So what we've done is we have contracted around the me part of the experience, and we have split ourselves off from the experienced, and so we are fighting against reality, because the interdependent nature of reality, we are fighting against that. So when we fight against reality, then we have mental afflictions such as attachment and aversion, we suffer, and often the people around us suffer as well. Sometimes in our actions, this self-grasping is not as strong. And that often happens when we're more focused on the activity rather than the me who's doing the activity. For example, absorbed in reading a good book, absorbed in a program on TV, absorbed in solving a problem at work. In those occasions, we're more focused on the activity rather than the agent, the me who's doing it. And so what we find there, of course, is self-grasping is a little bit reduced. And often we find in those experiences that things seem to go a lot better, things seem to flow better, time seems to go quite quickly. Why? Because we're not grasping so much on me, we're not so out of sync with reality as normal. And this is very much amplified in people who've developed high level of focus in their activities. For example, professional musicians, professional athletes who spent thousands of hours of training in their activity and have developed a high level of focus in their activity. And then often when they're engaging in that activity, they often talk about being in the zone or the flow state. And of course what's happening there is they're so much focused on the activity that the grasping onto me is very much reduced, even to the point where sometimes they'll say, there was no sense of me, there was just the music playing, there was just the sporting activity happening. And on top of that, they also then often report peak performance, optimum performance in that state. Why? Because they're not fighting against reality so much, because the grasping is very much reduced. But this is only due to increased concentration. Here, of course, in emptiness practice, the Heart Sutra, we're talking about not just reducing self-grasping through better focus on the activity, we're talking about eliminating self-grasping altogether by realizing emptiness. And so if we realize emptiness, we're realizing there is in fact no boundary in the entire universe. Now there seems to be boundaries everywhere. There's a boundary here, there's a me here, there, everything has a boundary, everything is separate and discrete. But when we realize emptiness, we'll realize there's not one single boundary in the entire universe. In particular, there's no boundary between me and you, me and world. Because now, of course, we have this self-grasping, and there seems to be independent me here, independent world. But that self-grasping, of course, is completely irrational. And to really highlight that, we can ask this question. Is this big? Is it big? So you can't have big on its own. You can't have big and small. You can only have big relative to small. Like that, you can only have up with down, in with out. Like that, you can only have me relative to not me. Subject, object, experiencer, experienced. But the way in which we see ourselves now, this grasping onto independent me is exactly like saying this is big. It's completely irrational, completely out of sync with reality. But if we realize emptiness, we'll realize there is no boundary. But of course, that doesn't mean everything becomes one big blob. And often we hear people say, according to Buddhism, everything's one. Technically, that's not right. One is still dualistic talk. You can only have one if there's two. So technically, one is inaccurate. And then often people feel, oh, everything becomes one big blob. But is big and small one? I mean, one means identical. Big and small are not one. But they're not two. Two means big and small. So, technically speaking, emptiness is not saying everything's one. But sometimes it's translated as that. But the original word in Tibetan and Sanskrit is everything is not two. And so people think, not two? That means one. But that's still dualistic talk. So therefore, big and small, of course, exist. It's not like they become one, identical, but they're not two. Meaning there's no boundary. Meaning there's not me and world independent. It's like big and small independent. So if we realize that, it's not somehow we'll all become one or one big blob. There will still be me and world, just like there's still big and small, but there's not independent. There's no boundary there. There's not big and small. And so by realizing that with respect to ourselves and others, we'll realize there's not one single boundary in the entire universe, and therefore we'll have boundless love and compassion for everyone. This is a measure of how our emptiness practice is going. If we are meditating on emptiness and having some little experience and wondering whether that's a valid experience or we're just sort of spacing out or something, what's happening outside of the meditation? Is there some little hint that your mind is becoming a little bit more calm? That your mental afflictions are reducing a little bit? That you are feeling a little bit more connected with others? If this is a little bit your experience after the meditation, very good sign. It means our emptiness practice is heading in the right direction. We are starting to undermine this self-grasping. But of course, if we have some experience in meditation, probably it'll wear off very quickly. So maybe for just some moments or minutes or a little bit longer, maybe you'll feel somehow much more connected with others. You'll feel more kind and compassionate, simply spontaneously arising. And then, of course, it'll sort of wear off and we'll go back to our sort of normal habits. So that's why here, as I mentioned right at the beginning, those three stages, go, nyam, tok. Go is intellectual. So we get an intellectual idea of what we're trying to do in this practice. Then we meditate and have some taste or experience. And then we need to go to the next level of tok, of realization. We want this experience of emptiness to be longer lasting. If we want it longer lasting, we need to improve our attention skills. We need to do the concentration practice, the shamatha practice. The more we do that and have that as the basis for the emptiness practice, the vipassana practice of emptiness, the more we'll penetrate, the stronger the experience, the longer it will permeate our mind after the meditation. So this is the trajectory we're following. There was a question over here.
Yeah. Even in concentration meditation, in shamatha, sometimes they have the experience that there's no boundaries without realizing emptiness and nothing, but no boundaries, and it remains even after the meditation.
Very good point. A couple of things to say here. One is that when we talk about this experience of emptiness, we're really talking about this sort of non-conceptual, non-dualistic type of experience. But we're not saying if the mind is somehow not conceptual, that the mind is still, that somehow this is automatically an experience of emptiness. So often people doing this and other meditations and their mind goes very quiet and there's no strong sense of anything and they go, oh, I'm realizing emptiness. But no, not really. We're just having a quiet mind. So, you know, we need to be careful we don't misinterpret experiences. No, I'm coming. So that's one point. Another point is that our normal sense of self is usually reinforced by two things. One is a solid sense of body that's usually there most of the time. We have a solid sense, you know, me. So solid sense of body, reinforcing sense of me. Then the other thing that reinforces sense of me is all the things going on in our mind, our thoughts, emotions, stories and that. So all of this mental content that's constantly coming up normally is constantly reinforcing a sense of me. But if we sit down in meditation, and particularly if we set a good posture, then often the solid sense of body can collapse to the point where even we don't notice the body at all. On top of that, if we're doing this shamatha practice, observing the breath or observing the mind, and then suddenly our mind goes quiet, then there's nothing reinforcing a sense of me mentally. So suddenly there's no sense of solid body, there's no mental content that normally is there reinforcing sense of me, so there's nothing reinforcing a sense of me, so our normal sense of me collapses. And then often what happens is people freak out for the same reason, is they feel like either they're going out of existence or they're doing something wrong in the meditation because there's this fear arising, this existential fear. But again, there's nothing to fear in resting in a quiet, still mind. Because the only thing going out of existence is a false sense of me. A false sense of me where we are identifying with some aspect of our body and mind as me. Because that's now gone. So therefore, it's possible in simply shamatha practice to have this experience where we don't have a sense of body, the mind has gone quiet, nothing reinforcing a sense of me, and then if we're very intuitive, we could understand what that implies. If we're not intuitive, probably we're going to have fear because we think, oh, something's wrong here. My sense of me is vaporizing. I must be going out of existence, or I'm doing something wrong. And I've talked to many people who've had this experience, and often that happens just because they're starting to do a bit of mindfulness meditation or shamatha, and this happens and they freak out and they don't know what to do with that because they don't understand what that experience means because they've had no teachings about this idea of emptiness. So then they don't know, and then usually what happens is they get paralyzed with fear and they stop all practice altogether, and then they go, oh no, I'm not going there because something's going, I'm going crazy here, or my sense of me, something not right here. But again, there is absolutely nothing to fear in that experience. In fact, again, if we have studied a bit of this and we're intuitive, we can start to get this sense, oh, maybe I don't exist the way I think I do exist. But there's one more point, and that is this wisdom practice of emptiness. So that happens simply because that there's nothing reinforcing a false sense of me, that collapses. But in the emptiness practice, we are consciously looking for that me. And we don't find. But this emptiness experience is not just not finding, it's knowing that it's not findable. So in the shamatha, we don't find because we don't see. But that's not necessarily an understanding of emptiness, because we weren't consciously looking and understanding it's not findable. It's just that it's not, in this moment, it's not appearing. Whereas in the emptiness practice, if we're doing the emptiness meditation in a proper way, and we get to the point of not finding, because we've done the explicit search and we've looked everywhere, we know not finding now means not findable, meaning it does not exist independently. So even though we can have a little bit of a taste in the shamatha, the Vipassana approach is, of course, much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Much more better, yeah, not the right word. It's much more certain to come to, because we are looking and we know that the not finding means it's not findable, whereas in shamatha we may not necessarily understand that the not finding or not appearing means it's not findable. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But yes, we can have a little taste of emptiness in the shamatha, and if we're very intuitive and sharp, we can sort of interpret that in a good way.
I think it happened to me maybe once or twice where, like you just described, I lost the sense of my body.
Sure.
But then when I came back, it felt like I was out of consciousness.
You were?
Like I fainted or something. Like I was just not there. Wasn't there.
Sometimes, of course, also another thing we have to be careful of is sometimes in this experience, particularly when the sense of body dissipates, often we end up drifting into dullness, into a lot of dullness. And then, of course, in dullness, it's not so much things are not appearing in our mind, they don't just register. So it's the same experience. The mind is gone, it's sort of quiet, but it's not because there's not really anything there. It's just our mind is so dull, nothing's registering. So that is simply an experience of dullness. It's okay, it's nice, but so then often then what happens is we are losing awareness, sharpness. And so when we come out of that, it feels like often we've come out of some sort of unconscious state because we were heading that way.
It wasn't like I was asleep.
No.
I was just like out of my body.
Yeah. Again, I think what happens is that often when we come out of that state, we instantly grasp onto, again, body and mind, and so then our experience shifts dramatically. And so it seems like we've acquired something new, or we've come out of a sort of a completely different state, because we weren't identifying with body and mind, and now very quickly we are. So it's a very radical shift. So I think this is why you're having this sort of experience. Yeah.
Why the word emptiness?
Why the
word emptiness was chosen to describe this phenomenon? I mean, it's really, this word is really like something I don't really.
Yeah. It's actually the original Sanskrit word is shunyata, and it's actually a very literal translation, very good translation. Shunyata, shunya means like hollow. It's actually, I think, the same word for zero, which actually I think was invented by Indian mathematician, zero. And so the idea of zero, which is shunya, literally means hollow, meaning no essence, no core to it. So actually the emptiness is the same idea. There's no core, no essence. So again, though, when we see the word emptiness, we have to understand empty of what? That's what we need to ask. And we're not talking about empty of existence. We're talking about empty of independent existence, empty of a core, empty of inherent nature. So actually it's a very literal, very good translation for the original Sanskrit term.
While we are doing like concentration meditation, the
So
that's what helps.
yeah.
I thought maybe it's one of the...
Yeah. So in the concentration practice, or sometimes called shamatha practice, we can focus on the breath, the mind, mental image, many different things. As we are going further into that practice, deeper into the practice, what you will find is that the sense faculties, hearing, tactile, will start to go dormant. And so then what's left is the mental faculty, and of course, until we get deeper into practice, there will always be occasionally some thought coming up. Even if we're focusing on the breath, there'll be a thought or something popping up. But then we go deeper into practice, the mind, the mental faculty starts to quieten down. And so then we're left with basically sensory faculties shut down, so no sense of body. And then the mind is completely quiet. So there's nothing, no mental content reinforcing a sense of self. So our normal sense of identity, which is constantly reinforced by solid body and mental activity, is completely dormant. So then often again, when people first have that experience, completely freak out because they misunderstand that experience to mean I'm going crazy, I'm going out of existence, I'm doing something wrong. But again, that experience, even in the concentration shamatha practice, is a sign we are actually going better in the practice. And as I mentioned before, if we're very intuitive and sharp and have some idea about emptiness, we can start to appreciate, maybe there is no findable me here. So what you'll find is that whether we come to this experience in the shamatha or we do the vipassana practice of searching and we come to a fear experience, is that often comes because we don't appreciate what emptiness means. That emptiness means dependent arising. So we end up just flipping from here to here. If we start to reflect on emptiness and dependency, all of this idea, and really appreciate what that means, that they're two sides of a coin, then what we'll find is that when we get to the not finding experience, instead of fear, we'll have joy. Because we'll realize that the thing that we've believed in our entire life, that is the root of all of our suffering, simply does not exist. We'll be very happy about that. In fact, if we think about it, it's absolutely crazy that the root of all of our mental afflictions and suffering is a non-existent. Something that does not exist and has never existed. That is the root of all of our suffering. It's only because we believe it exists, we suffer. I mean, it's actually crazy when you think about it. Because we believe in something like, a non-existent as existing, that's why we suffer. So let's just finish off here the next part of those two words. In the Heart Sutra, the emptiness is not other than form, form is also none other than emptiness. And so here we have form is empty, emptiness is form. So this is the ultimate nature of form, and this is the conventional nature of form, that it is a dependent arising. So here we have what's called the two truths. So the two truths are not somehow two alternate realities. They are two truths. They're talking about one reality. And conventional truth is dependent arisings. It's everything that exists. And everything that exists is a dependent arising. And ultimate truth is how those conventional truths exist, that they are empty of independent existence. So ultimate truth, or emptiness, is a quality of all of the conventional truths. They are not two sort of independent realities. And so to really highlight that, we have these last two statements. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. And so those two statements together refer to the third and fourth profundity. The third one is that the two truths are one entity. One entity means that you can't, that emptiness is not somehow floating in the air there somewhere, that emptiness only exists relative to phenomena. You can only have emptiness of pen, emptiness of laptop. There's not sort of some emptiness there separate from the phenomena. So that's what it means by one entity. One entity means it's not like emptiness is here and the pen is here. They are one entity. But of course that doesn't mean they're identical. Emptiness and pen is not the same. So that's the fourth point. Is two truths are nominally distinct. So this means that emptiness of pen and pen are not the same thing. You can't have pen there and emptiness of pen here. They're one entity, meaning they always come together, but they are two aspects. That emptiness is a quality of the pen, which therefore means it's nominally distinct. So emptiness of pen and pen are not the same thing, but they're not two different things either. So that's what these two statements are saying together. And that's what's meant by emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. It means this. So these are the fourfold profundity. Any questions about that? Yeah.
When you say emptiness is not other than form,
Yeah.
emptiness relates to something.
Emptiness of form.
Emptiness of form.
Correct.
Only the emptiness of form is no other than form. Emptiness of any other thing is no other than that thing.
That's right. That's what it's saying. Yeah. Exactly. Perfect. Speak up a little. I can't hear you. Something? This? Okay. So, she wants me to repeat my explanation of number 4 here. So, two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. Conventional truth is everything that exists. Ultimate truth is how that exists, meaning everything is empty of independent existence. So here, when we're saying two truths are one entity, it's saying that you can't have the pen here and emptiness of pen over there, that they always come together. That's what the word one entity means. So the emptiness of pen is always together with pen. You can't have emptiness of pen without pen. You can't have pen without emptiness of pen. They always come together. But they're not identical. They're not the same thing. And that's what this means, nominally distinct. So emptiness of pen is not the same as pen. They are distinct, but they always come together. It's a bit like here, nominally distinct would be the colour of this pen and the shape of this pen are one entity. You can't have the colour of this pen here and the shape of the pen there. They always come together. But the colour of the pen and the shape of the pen are not the same, are they? They are nominally distinct. Same with emptiness and the pen.
So,
How could I?
how could Avalokiteshvara be appears to be not capable of being both
Right.
absorbed in
Sure.
emptiness?
Sure. So Avalokiteshvara here was trying to show how to, with emptiness, you can become enlightened. So he was appearing as a bodhisattva and showing this is how you become enlightened. Because if he's appearing as a Buddha, people may think, well, that's okay, you're a Buddha, but I'm not, so how do I, maybe I can't do that. Whereas if he's appearing as a bodhisattva, he's appearing as someone closer to the audience. And then you think, well, he's on his way, so maybe we can do the same. We can also be on our way to enlightenment. So it's a sort of way of, I think, of helping people. If we're trying to learn something and they're way superior to us, we go, well, that's all good, but I can't do that. But if they sort of appear to us as if they're maybe a little bit more advanced than us, we go, oh, okay, maybe I can do that as well. So I think it's sort of what's called skillful means for the benefit of the audience. Okay, let's just finish the next sentence for the day, because that involves the same thing, the same section. So after that, it says, in the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. So here, we've seen how to practice this wisdom of emptiness in terms of the body, and understanding that the body is empty of independent existence, but that doesn't mean there's no body at all. But because it's empty of independent existence, the body can appear and function, and that the body and emptiness of body are same entity, nominally distinct. And so in the same way, then we can investigate to come to see that the feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. In other words, the mind and all the parts of the mind is also empty of inherent existence. So this is the instructions for the first two stages of the path, is that we are to investigate. First, we look at the person and see that there's no independently existent person, but that doesn't mean there's no person at all, but the person exists as a dependent arising. Then we investigate the body, and then we investigate the mind. So this is what's being said here in this answer from Avalokiteshvara. So that's all I wanted to cover today. I think we've still got 2 or 3 minutes left. If anyone has any last questions for the day. Yeah.
I want to ask about the story about the tree.
The tree.
Can you explain it again with the emptiness?
Right. About tree falling in the forest. Does it make a sound if no one's there to watch it or hear it? I think a better question there is, who is asking this question? It's a similar but if I walk out the door, there's still going to be a laptop here. Same sort of question. The interesting question is, who's walking out the door? Because often when these questions are asked, people are asking them either explicitly or with an implicit assumption that there's an independent me here who wants to know that. So if there's an independent me walking out the door, then of course there's still a laptop here. And the lower Buddhist philosophical systems, which accept that there's an independent me, say exactly this. Of course there's a laptop there. You crazy? If there's not, nothing exists. So actually all the lower Buddhist philosophical systems, for something to exist, it must be findable. So for them, yes, tree falls in the forest, makes a sound, no problem. Here, the real question is, who's asking this question? Who's walking out the door? Answer that question, and you'll get your answer. And of course, the only way to really answer that question is to internalize, not intellectually. We won't intellectually figure it out. If we internalize and meditate, then we know. Then we have the answer through direct experience. Last question.
I've studied Buddhism some, not a lot. This is the first time I'm having kind of what I think is a very complex idea given to me. And what would you say for someone who understands things like, understands whatever that means, mindfulness What like
Yeah.
piece can I
Yeah,
digest
sure.
day to day?
Yeah. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow in the last session, but just something brief now, and then we'll finish. The idea of impermanence. None of us have a problem with accepting that, at least intellectually. You know, science has proven it, we know. What we can take away, and if we can really appreciate this in meditation, we're this close to emptiness. And that is, you know, we often hear in Buddhism and other contexts that impermanence is everything's changing moment by moment. So then the idea we have is this. That in the present moment there's something, and in the next moment it becomes something different. It changes, and the next moment it changes. Is this impermanence? Impossible. Because no matter how short the moment is, if we're saying there's a thing there in that moment, it means during that time it's not changing, which of course is not possible. So impermanence is not this, it's this. Meaning there's no thing there that you can point to that says in the next moment it's this thing. There's just constant change. So there's nothing to point to, is there? But things work. So if we can reflect on this and internalize this, and if we can really appreciate that impermanence is this and not this, we're this close to realizing emptiness. This close. Really. Okay, let's finish there. And so tomorrow then the schedule is would start at 9:30. So the morning schedule will be the same till lunchtime. And then after lunch again from 1:30 to, let me get the schedule here.